Around the time I attempted to apply at Whole Foods, there were deadlines that were coming up in regards to anniversaries on pieces of litigation, or rather, cases I had filed with the Northern District of Texas U.S. District Court. I've been trying to get some access to due process in this time frame, and what the district court has done is such an egregious abuse of the process that, in the isolation, without having anybody, literally anybody to talk to, and without having anybody report back to me, while major defaults have been accruing, I cannot go through the local Northern District system. As a matter of fact, the last time I tried to apply on an appropriate deadline with the Court of Appeals through the appropriate process, they again obstructed that and told me that I had to apply through the local district, which is not true. Not only does it violate the actual procedure, but at that time, there was something going on, and I understood that the local court system was co conspiring to try to use my litigation in some sort of derivative action that was incredibly dangerous. And not only was it incredibly dangerous, but it was illegal and connected to what the actual charges were. It was, to me, what I understood to be an agreement to engage in a kickback that would also provide a bribe to other local actors that were engaged in crime and had already institutionalized the mechanisms through which to commit the crime. I did not exercise my option to appeal through the local district court with a specific understanding that to identify and execute it as an option would be to co conspire with what I already knew was an abuse of the appropriate process and was an intent to compel me to agree to cooperate with other crimes that were happening via the local district court. There's absolutely, at this point, no legitimate reason for trying to field me back to or bounce me back to the local district court, especially now with the number of people alleged to be members of the judicial system in this district that are implicated in disciplinary violations or in abuses of process, even by their own local rules. So I did it. But they had the same magistrate judge made a verdict in a very high profile case that I believe would not have been able to move forward if they had actually acknowledged the merits of my case, instead of using my case merely as some sort of loan for other efforts. Now, I, had to go through and deal with what I had to deal with, and there were specific deadlines that were coming up in terms of the annual situation. When I tried to apply for a job in good faith, and things end up happening the way they do, all I can do is be honest and forthright about the disclosure and try to engage a good faith process with that organization as a means by which to try to prevent against going in there and having something happen that would interfere with being able to move forward in good faith. But it is obvious now that's not what this was. If there was already an ongoing and concurrent process where actors in the state of Texas were trying to co conspire with people in the private sector in order to do illegal things as part of some sort of subversive activity, that's not my fault. And even from a standpoint of being justified as firing me from the job, does not deal with the fact that they intentionally and willingly and knowingly opened up these electronic accounts on me, told me to go on the clock and expect to get paid for actual work that I did that I was supposed to be able to do safely, with an understanding that because it was work for that organization, they would provide me with legal support and legal protection. And then find out later that they allowed for somebody to interfere with and manipulate what I was trying to do with their organization to accomplish other ends, up to and including engaging in pension fraud that ended up resulting in and being concurrent with a terrorist attack on a place where I formerly was employed. See, I would have been a part of whatever the first response was to the incident in the Bay Area if I was still working at the job I was working at 7 years ago. I would have been a part of the emergency preparedness response because that's what my job was. And it's also why, in the last 5 years, I know that what they allege is the inadequacy of the state funding for their need is superficial and is actually not honest and accurate. I know that by 2014, they were already supposed to have funded, in place, and trained the various kinds of emergency responses specifically connected to a potential for a public health incident, which would also involve understanding the possibilities for a public health incident to be exploited in regards to acts of domestic and even international terrorism. This was a mandatory training that local public health departments were required in consideration of, among other things, their relationship to aspects of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, but also in consideration of anti-terrorist legislation that was applied as a result of September 11th. They were required already before 2015 to have these trainings in place, to have their personnel in place, to have various structures within their organizations in place, and they had already been appropriated for it. It had already been funded. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it was funded instead of other programs that might have been considered to be more akin to or likened to preferences that they would have had as employees, including things considering certain kinds of benefits or certain kinds of other sort of amenities that one would expect if they were a full-time, competent employee with a public administration or a agency that was funded by the federal government or through appropriations to the federal government. They were required by law to already have these in place by the beginning of 2015. In the last 5 years, what I've seen is in 2 states and more than 7 cities, some refusal of staff to do what they're legally required to do, to be qualified to do their job, to try to manipulate people who either need services or are in an entry-level position, to consider that their leadership and their organization that's in charge of the ultimate decisions around dispersal of financing and delegation of financing didn't give them the money to be concerned with actually applying what the policy says literally. Well, we don't have the money to follow that policy. That's not true. You have the money to make sure that somebody that's working around chemicals, if nothing else, is reminded that the policy says that while they're doing these things, these are the standards they need to make in order to assure that these chemicals are safely handled. It's literally right there. I just read it. I just went through a video training. You literally, every single day, walked by. You gave us his name. You told us something special about the country he came from. Yeah, well, I like him very much. You walk right by. You're supposed to be the supervisor training us. You see it right there. You leave it there. It's up to me, a trainee, to go and discuss it with him. Every single day I return on site, you have the same setup. Every single day, you have the same racial scheme play out in terms of who acts like what. I already told you. I sent you emails. I put it into the responses to the surveys during the training. These are problems with the training modality. And then you're going to do what? You're going to drag it out long enough to hook up electronic accounts that are then connected to what is the city of Dallas expecting to get as a payoff for whatever it did in attempting to co-conspire with whatever the extortion is connected to that terrorist attack on San Francisco. What is the administration of the city of Dallas, literally, in conjunction with its co-conspirators in the state of Texas, expecting, literally, from the city and county of San Francisco and or the state of California to cease and desist using my electronic accounts to continue participating in financing acts of terrorism and other crime. They did not altogether cut off my accounts. They terminated me. And they continue to send me emails with misrepresentative information and make phone calls at just the right time. instead of actually going through a process they already explicated in terms of how to address grievances, and absolutely 100% refusing to let me get past the leadership of the store so that I can actually talk with the legal team. Hoping what? That again, you're going to be able to just get me out of there, hook up all of these big deals that the city and the city's co-conspirators are going to help you launder through the major investment firm, and then spend another 6 months working a stock issue so that then you can set it up that when I try to go for another job, then you transfer that stock in connection with opening up new electronic accounts associated with my identity in a completely bad faith process. This is the third time. This is the third time in 13 months. And each time, there's been major, major, major terrorist attacks associated. I'm not the only one. I was not the only one hired at that time. And I was not the only one who had electronic accounts and had to go through the training at that time. It is not acceptable to automate a process of trafficking people so that you can try to repeatedly extort them into engaging in even more and more unsafe behaviors on the job as a way to aid and abet whoever else it is up the chain of command in the position to make the actual calls about engaging in this level of crime. That's what's going on right now. With all of the other stuff that's going on, that's what's going on right now. Nobody has the authority to set up a multi-year process of defrauding the government in order to make a false justification for implementation of elements of the War Production Act, or the War Powers Act, to try to ex post facto cover up for what they've already been doing, especially when you refuse to acknowledge that you allowed warfare and biological warfare to be wielded on your own people in your own country and then lie and call it healthcare. There is no reason why the city of Dallas, the city of any city in the state of Texas, or any city in the state of California, at least, has a justification for saying they did not have what they needed to be prepared for an emergency. There's no justification. Even if there were shortcomings in the public health response because of what they had been going through, I went there on site 4 years. I gave reports. You don't like my attitude? Well, I don't like you exposing workers to unsafe condition concerning setups related to chemical safety the same fucking day that somebody in your pension system network is hooking up a terrorist attack on another city. I don't like it. It makes me angry. And it impacts my morale in the workplace. And sometimes when I'm angry because of things that happen in that hostile work environment, I have a problem focusing on understanding why you were put into a position where you can deny me access to legal protections against efforts to try to extort me into cooperation with acts of terrorism. And I'm very concerned that it's so racist that every single place I've gone for 5 years has the exact same completely racist setup, where I specifically am misidentified as fitting some demographic requirement that has a disproportionate burden when it comes to co-conspiring with crime under an alleged redistribution as some form of reparations. What do you expect as reparations for a redistribution of access to protections in misuse of chemical warfare? What do you expect as reparations and access to biological weapons that are wielded under false pretenses and in manners that result in fatalities against people in your own community? There is absolutely nothing practical from a workers' rights standpoint or from a racial justice standpoint in consistently subjecting me to completely racist scenarios where people intentionally engage in activities they already know are not only unsafe but criminal. And it's at this level. We're not talking about a little store that might be some sort of pop-up front for some sort of local gang activity. We're talking about comprehensive organized crime syndicates using major corporate outlets as fronts as legitimate for what is currently going on that is so illicit that it literally is trying to get away with terrorist attack that is impacting the water system of an entire city and county municipality. If people in Texas didn't like the specific kind of fintech that San Francisco disproportionately had market share in, and Texas wanted it to have a different imbuement and thought that they were going to engage in some sort of competitive scheme around rates associated with distribution. Please recall, Texas, that in 2017, you were already apprised through the state's criminal court system about concerns regarding the criminal activities associated with illicit distribution. This is not some sort of market competition. These are criminal charges